Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Tendring Colchester Borders. We must get a title, Garden Community Joint Committee. It's a good breathing exercise. Get through it in one go. So there we are. A warm welcome to everybody who's taken the time and trouble to come here. Members of the public, those who I know from looking around and recognising at least a number of you take a really deep interest and thank you for that in a rich proposition which has to be delivered to meet the promises that we signed up to as three councils now quite some time ago. So it's an important moment tonight. Thank you for coming to hear and see where we're at. I know for many of you it's important to represent your personal view or the interests of your residents, and it's our opportunity as a committee to listen to that. If there are specific questions, we can do our best. I'll ask officers to pick them up and respond. If they are more general in the statement, then you will understand, I'm sure, that we may not, but we will reflect on what we hear and feed that into our future processes and next steps as best we can. Okay, let's go to the agenda. First two items around the election of the chair and deputy chair, which in usual circumstances changes once a year, municipal year, or otherwise. The intent to ensure and demonstrate that this is a joint committee. The thing I would always say is about how we operate, and that is in accordance with the duty to cooperate and the agreements we have signed to represent together the interests and needs of our residents. Councillor Andy Baker.
Thank you, Chairman. As there are only two of us from Tendring District Council here, what would normally happen, I understand, bear in mind I'm only a substitute for this evening, is that a member from Tendring would potentially be proposed. However, I propose for this meeting for going forward until the next meeting that you remain Chairman, Councillor King, and I propose that you stay sat where you're sat. Thank you.
Thank you. The seat's quite comfortable. I'm happy to continue my turn in the chair, acting for all of us. Ask the members of the committee, is that acceptable to you?
Agreed.
Thank you. In which case we get neatly to item. Oh, we should have a second. I beg your pardon.
I'm quite happy to second that.
Thank you. And so I'm going to put the question one more time to complete this. Are we content on that basis?
Agreed.
Thank you very much. Try and do better with item 2. Election of the deputy chair of the joint committee. Could I have a proposer?
Chairman, thank you. I propose that Councillor Lee Scott be deputy chairman of the joint committee until such time as we decide otherwise, really. Thank you.
Could I have a seconder, please?
And I'm quite happy to second that as well.
Oh, thank you very much indeed. That's Councillor Mark Cousins. Thank you, Mark. Committee, are we agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you. I see nods and noises. They both will do. Thank you very much. Okay, item 3. Apologies for absence and substitutions, and clearly there's a little churn tonight. So I go to Ian Ford. Ian.
Thank you, Chairman. I can officially report apologies for absence this evening from Councillor Julie Young, and Councillor William Sunnox is substituting for Councillor Young. And I can also report apologies from Councillor Carlo Guglielmi, and Councillor Andy Baker, as he's already indicated, is substituting for Councillor Guglielmi. I also need to point out that Councillor Bush is not present at the meeting this evening. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much indeed. We'll note that for the record. I thank the substitutes, William and Andy, for making the time and trouble, for tracking where we're at and taking the interest that they do. Thank you for your attendance tonight. And a moment, just as although Councillor Mike Bush is not here, just for the record, to thank him for his service in support joint committee and the work that we are collectively doing. Thank you. Okay, that gets us to item 4 of the meeting, which is minutes of the previous meeting of the joint committee. That's on page 7 to 18, for those who want to know where they are in a very large pack. So I'll put that to members. Is there any comments or corrections that any would need to propose? That not being the case, can I ask you to confirm that you're content that we sign as a correct record the minutes of the previous meeting joint committee, which is the 9th of October? Okay. Do I have a second? Can I have a seconder, please? Thank you very much, Andrea. Thank you very much indeed. Okay, item 5, very necessary in the world, well, in fact, in all we do, to be frank and open about disclosable interest. So item 5 is declarations of interest. Members of the joint committee are invited to declare any disclosable pecuniary interest, other registrable interests, all capitalised here, or non-registrable interest, the nature of it in relation to any item on the agenda. Any need to say or show?
None, Chair.
Thank you, then that's none for the record. In which case we get on to item 6, which is the public speaking part of our gathering. So this is what's, I hope, obvious, an opportunity for members of the public and interested parties and stakeholders in a long-term endeavour that is the gardening community to speak to the joint committee on any specific item of the agenda to be considered. But we'll do that, it says here. We'll do this after, we'll do it now. All right, well, we'll take you now, and then I shall bear in mind points arising when we get to the individual items. So we have a list, and I'm not sure if everybody knows where they are on it. So I'll give you a moment or two if you're thinking, oh, I didn't know I was first up. So in the order that I've got them, and we'll do public, and then parish councils and community liaison group, and then we'll do ward and division councillors. The only difference in practical terms is the time that we allow. Are we going to give a warning bell 1 minute to go? We will, okay. So to help people close well, and we'll give you an indicator when you're within a minute of the close. So public members have got 3 minutes, parish council and community liaison group, and ward and divisional councillors have got 5. So Town Councillor Rick Andrew, who I know is chair of the Wivenhoe Town Council Travel and Transport Subcommittee. Rick, would you like to come forward to that? It looks a little lonely, but you are really welcome to take the strides over there and settle yourself down for that. Thank you. I know you've done this here and elsewhere. Welcome.
Good evening, everybody. I've been asked to speak at fairly short notice. I haven't officially cleared everything I've got to say with all my fellow councillors, but I think most of them would support what I'm going to be saying. The recent press release from this committee claimed that the new link road will, quotes, improve access and help manage traffic congestion on local roads. However, as I understood it, construction traffic was supposed to use the A120, not the A133. And how can a £60 million cul-de-sac that ends in a farmer's field possibly alleviate congestion? Essex Highway's forecast a year or more ago was that north-south traffic flows on the whole of the link road would be 50-50. In other words, the A120 would take 50% of the traffic. But now 100% of the traffic will have to use the already chronically congested A133 for the foreseeable future. Highways England's statement of common ground calls for the modal shift forecast to be reassessed based on A, what has actually been achieved elsewhere, not sort of finger in the wind aspirations that assume that active travel here can somehow be magically 50% higher than Cambridge, which is way higher than any other town in the country. And B, that phase 2 of the link road is unlikely to happen until 2041. As far as I know, this hasn't happened. I certainly haven't seen any revised forecasts. By 2041, the garden community will have 3,750 homes. That's about nearly 9,000 population, which is big, makes it bigger than Wivenhoe. Most of whom will have to commute to work or college or whatever beyond the garden community. And the trigger point analysis, which I know fellow councillors are very concerned about, concludes that section 2 is not needed, phase 2 rather, the link road is not needed until 4,000 homes have been built. But that assumes that the aspirational DPD modal shift targets are met, which, as Highways England say, is extremely unlikely. And section 5 of the same trigger point analysis admits that at 2,000 homes, the impact is already likely to be quite on queues and congestion is already likely to be quite severe. Surely that should be the trigger point for phase 2. I mean, to accommodate this extra traffic without making congestion even worse, a significant percentage of existing tendering commuters will have to switch to other modes. But the rapid transport system will not benefit residents of Brightlingsea, Clacton, etc. There are no proposals for more trains or a new railway station as per Cambridge North and Ebbsfleet. And there are no other proposals which are likely to significantly stimulate modal shift. Wivenhoe is the same distance from Colchester as the garden community, but nobody except my marathon runner neighbour walks or runs into Colchester and back every day. So active travel effectively relies on a massive increase in cycling from a current 2% modal share, which is extremely unrealistic. I mean, I personally often cycle into Colchester from Wivenhoe, but few others do. And we've got the benefit of the only decent cycle route into Colchester, the Wivenhoe Trail. But garden community cyclists won't have such an attractive route, nor they have a flat route. They'll have to cycle uphill and down dale, and along the A133 is not a pleasant place to cycle. So to persuade people from the garden community to cycle to places like Severals, Hospital, etc., you'd need a bridge from the top of Clingo Hill to High Woods. It's just an unrealistic assumption. Again, we've got plenty of buses, but most of them run 80% empty. So again, the assumptions of a massive modal shift to RTS are unrealistic. I'm not against the garden community at all, but can we please be honest about a traffic impact and make much more effort to mitigate it? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Rick. And a couple of observations from me, if I might. I hope I'll be reflecting how I believe members more broadly see this. And then I'll go to our lead officer here to my left, Jonathan, if you wouldn't mind picking up a couple of those points. If you repeat them, it won't matter what my response is, I know. But there is a shared concern here. We want this to work, so we don't want to worsen congestion any more than it is avoidable. We have to have plans which are deliverable. They have to include the balance of the link road. And the words I choose to use, and I know it's shared by colleagues, is that has to be as soon as is practical. Now, there's a real dance and debate around that. And behind you, Latimer colleagues are thinking how much and how soon. And we know there's a relationship between investment in infrastructure in that almost traditional sense and everything else that is judged viable at the moment, but has to be delivered. So we understand, I guess, the questions. I think we sit in a very similar place. And I want to say that we are absolutely determined to ensure, and it's conditioned, the whole project is conditional on this, the link road happening, and for it to be based in terms of timing and introduction on as solid an evidence and modelling as we can. So I've kind of, in my view, somewhat taken Jonathan's spiel, but I hope he'll reinforce what I've said, which includes that really critical point. If you want to comment on 2041, please do. But the really critical point that past modelling is accepted as not the modelling that we're going to have. So, Jonathan, would you like to pick up on those 2 points? And I hope they'll give you a rounded answer.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So a couple of points to make for the benefit of all attendees. I think one is that when the planning application for the garden community comes forward to this committee, it will legally have to be accompanied by an environmental impact assessment and a transport assessment, which fully models from the developer's proposals and the work they've done in agreement with the Highways Authority and the Planning Authority to, as accurately as possible, forecast the impact on various travel modes of what the garden community will generate. That piece of work has not happened yet. there have been several pieces of modelling which have been commissioned for different purposes, including analysis that was part of supporting Essex County Council's compulsory purchase order, which was subsequently withdrawn, and side roads order, which was subsequently proceeded with and confirmed by the Secretary of State. So we have had several pieces of evidence produced thus far, including in support of the DPD, which has been through examination, and in support of the process of CPO and SRO, which make various assumptions about the impact on the network as you progress through to a full garden community of 7,500 homes. I would emphasise what Chair David King said a minute ago, which is that it is the wider planning requirement of the adopted Section 1 plan that the full link road delivery is secured with both funding and planning before permission is granted for the garden community. And that position is reinforced in the DPD, the emerging DPD, and will be the basis on which this committee would need to decide on the planning application, determine the application in accordance with the adopted development plan at the time. A couple of other points. I mean, the modal shift and the modal share aspirations for the garden community are ambitious. That is an explicit policy which the Joint Committee has pursued for several years. And it's not true to say that National Highways have a formal objection either to the DPD or to the link road, the full link road, which indeed has planning permission with the consent, with the consultation having taken place with National Highways in preparation of that planning approval, planning application and subsequent approval. The interventions which support that modal shift include the package of interventions which are on the ground now, funded by Homes England and the Housing Infrastructure Fund. So it's a single contract with Essex County Council and Homes England to deliver the rapid transit scheme in its different sections and phase 1 of the A1331 to enable the garden community development to take place and link into the existing road network. The park and choose facility on the A133 is a formal policy requirement of the DPD and will come forward alongside the planning application. And that park and choose facility, which the RTS services will stop at, is the main intervention to seek the modal shift among existing commuters, which you alluded to in your statement. I'll leave it there for now, Chair.
Thank you. I've got the 2041 point. Do you want to say something on that, please?
Sure. So, as you spoke on behalf of the committee to say, there is a wider aspiration to deliver the full link road as early as possible into the development. There are a number of traffic modelling exercises which have taken place and which will need to take place. There are a number of future modelling years for which a Colchester traffic model exists. One of those years is 2041. So there will be tests run against that model with scenarios which show the full phase 2 of the link road being built or being not built at various points in the future. 2031, I think 2036, 2041 are the existing modelling parameters that we can use. So we will expect that would be tested, but that doesn't make it a target. That makes it a modelling assumption to be tested. And the normal statutory requirements would apply for how the committee comes to determine that application. So, for example, the National Policy Planning Framework has a policy around a severe impact test on the existing network. That would have to be a threshold that the committee was satisfied with the evidence before it was either met or not met in coming to an overall view on determining the application. The committee could ask to look at different modelling years to assess whether they considered severe threshold had been met or not.
Thank you. I hope that's some assurance. Only one point I would stress, I hope on our collective behalf, because this is your opportunity, not ours, to have our internal conversations. We do have those, I have to say. We'll continue to, and we should, is that we collectively want really robust, sensible views on what modal shift will mean. So yes, aspiration, but you made your point to me personally, and I get it, you have again today. That has to be something that will stand the test of other experiences, how I would put it. So we should aim for the best that we can see can be achieved. Then we've got the challenge of making sure that we can help deliver that. Otherwise, we won't, for those of you with an open mind about this, Rick, we can't expect your cautious support. So I hope that's some help, and thank you very much for coming.
Okay.
The second of our public speakers is Professor Anthony Vickers. Welcome again. Thank you.
Thank you. So just for the record, I represent the Crockford and Empstead Action Group, the only group that represents residents that are within the zone of the garden community. And just on the record, we fought to stop this through the whole time, but have along the way clearly adopted a policy whereby we've tried to get the best of the worst. However, that has not happened. So I just want to comment on some of the things within the modifications. There's a statement within in the documentation. None of the modifications suggested by the council through the scheduling of suggested modifications were significant in that they did not seek to change the substance or intent of the DPD policy. During the hearings in May, I believe they were, I pointed out that the change in the wording to an aspiration of 50% green space from a sort of before that an implication that 50% would be the limit is significant. And if the Joint Committee do not think so, then our residents who have no faith in the Joint Committee's commitment to this housing estate having any connection with the word garden. This is no longer a garden community project, but instead a massive housing development. The councils are pandering to the developers. Shame on you all. Second point, MM7, depending on the outcomes of local junction modelling along Bromley Road into Colchester, some parcels of the development within the Crockford neighbourhood may need to access the link road instead of Bromley Road, suggesting wording to reflect this flexibility. As a resident of Crockford Heath, this was a very worrying, as it suggests that some parts of Crockford Heath will no longer be within Crockford Heath. You can't be connected to the link road and not connected to the link road. It's impossible, I think. So if some parts of Crockford Heath are to be connected, they then will not be part of Crockford Heath. So this is extremely worrying. So are we to expect that some of our residents will be removed? And I point out that right at the beginning of all of the garden development centres, within the government documentation, it said existing settlements had to be respected. This is a complete disrespect of the residents of Crockford Heath. MM8, acknowledging existing enhanced and other public transport can support homes as well as the RTMS, removes prejudging of phasing at Crockford. So is this to be interpreted as giving a green light to the developers to start carving away at parts of Crockford Heath and bringing forward the planning of Crockford Heath from phase 1 to phase 3? It was in phase 3 originally. This smells like it's saying it'll be right at the beginning because they know they can get access to Bromley Road, because the link road is a cul-de-sac. MM36, creation of the rapid transport system to enable a fast commute for residents to and from all neighbourhoods. We note the removal of the word rapid and its replacement with the word fast. Are we to take it that the word fast is no more defined than the word rapid was? I did ask for a clarification of the definition of rapid, and I was told there was none. But in anybody's mind, fast is the demotion from rapid. So what is the rapid transit? Is it rapid? Is it fast? Is it faster than a dog?
Thank you. That's interestingly vivid. And I understand, I think I understand some of the passions that drive it. Thank you for speaking frankly, because that at least is clear, isn't it, about what you and those...
Well, you need to know what residents feel.
Well, that's my point. Thank you. I get that completely. I'm not sure how many of these points we can pick up now, but if not, then we will come back to you, and if to the extent we can, put it into the record. But Amy, might I turn to you in the first instance? But just pick up those where an answer would add a value. If not, we'll take it away. I'm personally quite interested in rapid versus fast. It's not something that applies to me at all nowadays, but I understand the interest in it. Amy.
Thank you. I would firstly like to say that with regard to the modifications that have come out from the inspector, all everyone will have an opportunity to comment in a formal way on those modifications when we undertake the consultation, which will be starting very soon, and that will be the most appropriate point at which to make these points, which will then be considered by the planning inspector before any decision is finally made and his recommendation on the soundness of the plan is submitted. All of the modifications which have come from the inspector will be available to comment on in each individual point. And you've raised a number there which are related to specific modifications. I'll pick up just a couple of those just to provide some further clarification. With regards to the access to various parcels within Crockleford Heath, there was, as one of the modifications, some greater degree of flexibility built into the wording of that to allow access to particular future parcels to be accessed either to the Link Road or Bromley Road. However, it doesn't allow a watering down of the principles of filtered permeability, meaning that you can drive from the Link Road to Bromley Road. So there would always remain that restriction. And it would be entirely dependent on future modelling that would come forward and the master planning and design work that would be put forward as part of the planning application, which would then come forward for consideration. With regards to reference to the phasing being removed, this doesn't remove any requirement for a phasing plan to be submitted at the point of the planning application. So the phasing that was referred to within the DPD was based on the strategic master plan work that the councils did, which was indicative only. A phasing plan will still need to come forward and still be considered as part of a future planning application. With regard to the removal of the word rapid and changing it to fast, I believe that this change was suggested to just ensure some continuity between the wording within the DPD there. I'm not sure I can provide any greater clarity with regard to the definition between rapid and fast, but it was a point of continuity in the wording. Thank you.
Thank you. The only thing I would add is quite a lot has been published on the rapid transport system hopes and aspirations, because a lot is yet to be tied down. That has been shared, and that's very clear. That it's very clear about principle that Joint Committee were all united on, that if this is going to happen and everything is taking us down that road, that money has to be spent well. The outcome has to be, whatever the language we use, transport that's a cut above, public transport that's a cut above what we have, a distinct cut above what we have in accessibility, comfort, reliability, and pace. So there's a third word. Look, I'll stop there. There is, and you're right, thank you, Amy Lester, to just remind us all that, of course, the consultation to come is an opportunity to, in whatever depth any here and away from here, want to capture their concerns, and for that to then be taken into account as best we can. And the planning inspector won't he, look at all of this. But I wanted something of an answer to you in respect to you coming here. And that you used that word yourself, and you alone are entitled to judge how you feel. But I know that the intentions of the Joint Committee are to absolutely develop this community, this garden community, and that is how we see it. That is what drives us to be here in a way that does its best to meet the needs of existing communities. So I'll stop there. Thank you for your time. Number 3 is Russ Edwards, who's the project director of the Garden Community Latimer by Clarion Housing Group, it says here. Russ, again, you know your way around this. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good evening to the committee. Can I start by congratulating the members and their officers following the examination in public for the DPD earlier this year, another major milestone for the project. We are encouraged to see that the schedule of modifications that the inspector has asked to be the subject of public consultation are for the most part based on the statements of common ground prepared by officers and stakeholders. Latimer remains extremely supportive of the DPD and the suggested modifications, and I can confirm that our consultant team is continuing to develop master plan proposals as part of an outline application that will be compliant with the policy. By way of an update on programme, I can confirm that we are working to a revised planning submission target of second quarter 2025 and continue to engage proactively with the officers through pre-application engagement. Further public consultation is planned to support the application at the end of this year and early next year. I also wanted to update members on the estates management and stewardship strategy. Members will be aware that the councils have commissioned a pathway to stewardship strategy in the period since the last committee. Latimer are extremely supportive of this work and are engaging collaboratively with the councils and their consultant, CSS. We look forward to building on this piece of work once complete as part of the application documents to be submitted next year. It is also fantastic to see the project featured positively in both local and national press, with coverage of ECC having entered into a delivery contract for phase 1 of the A120-A133 link road, and with the new community being identified as a project that the new government is interested in accelerating through the New Homes Accelerator programme. We look forward to discussions with all parties, including MHCLG and Homes England, over the coming months to work out how they can best support the project moving forward. Lastly, I hope that some of you have been able to visit the Beth Chatto-led Meanwhile Garden project, established next to First Sight in Colchester, where our Essex young designers have both designed and helped to make the benches and seating. If not, please do. Thank you.
Thank you very much on behalf of the committee for what you have said. I know we would expect that, but nonetheless, it's good to hear. It's good to hear of your commitment to doing the work that's necessary to take us at pace into next year in the way which will make this real in terms of proposals that then will come to the committee. And thank you for your work, constructive work and attitudes, as I hear it, from our officer team supporting the joint committee. I will leave it like that. I don't think there was an open question there for us that needed clarification. Just press on, best pace. I know you'll be listening to all the things that are said, not least about the need to deliver that link road by whatever combination of your and public resources are available. So thank you very much indeed. Second category, parish councils and community liaison groups. So I've got, first of all, Manda O'Connell, who's the chair of the community liaison group. Thank you.
Good evening, Chair, councillors and ladies and gentlemen. The Community Liaison Group would like to support Matter 2, which is the proposed delegation to officers in respect of the EIA scoping requests. This is for the following reasons. Number one, this will be quicker and more direct, which is useful in particular for the Tendring Colchester Borders Garden Community development, which is subject to strict time constraints due to the nature of the HIF funding. Number two, in particular, it also allows for direct engagement of local stakeholders and expert bodies with planners in response to the scoping consultation. For example, the CLG, local people with local knowledge, including some experts in their field, such as groundwork and transport, who have scoping out objections with regard to the following: materials and waste, currently scoped out, with the potential damage to important aquifers and natural drainage areas if removed minerals are backfilled with waste construction material, as has been seen elsewhere in the county, with damaging results and numerous problems. And number two, flood risk and drainage, we feel should be scoped in, where we've seen this year standing water in the Crockleford area is higher than ever before. And this can only get worse with development unless specifically mitigated against by being scoped in the environmental assessment. And thirdly, sewage and wastewater, we believe, should most definitely be scoped in, as the current sewage works for Colchester East can already not cope with demand and use, with considerable effluent released into the tidal River Colne when use tops capacity. These concerns, it is hoped, will provide grounds to the planners, based on this local knowledge, to require these additional matters are scoped in rather than out. And finally, number 3, we believe it's beneficial to have this proposed delegation because it doesn't disallow the Joint Planning Committee's authority and final decision making, who will have the final say on the acceptable and suitable scope, no pun intended, of the current environmental impact assessment submitted by the developers. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, and acknowledge the effort that you and others do put into this. I'm aware of the remarks you've ran us through again tonight, and you made a couple of very important points. When we get to that item, I'm sure we'll take that into account, not least the engagement that this allows, as well as the pace we hope to process, and the fact that nothing's lost. Final say comes back to the committee. We will all value that engagement because it's essential all the way through here. It's one of the reasons you're here and we're here tonight. So a process that helps that along at the earliest stages allows for those with local knowledge to speak up for what they know. So this is part of the guidance, in effect, that we would expect, and not just the official guidance, but the informal, unofficial, and local knowledge guidance that ways that help to reinforce points of interest and concern for residents. So thank you, and recognise all of those. I'm sure colleagues do too. The quality of our water supplies and our rivers as amongst the items you mentioned. So on behalf of us all, thank you, and thank you for what you and others are doing. Now, can I invite forward Parish Councillor Adam Gladwin, who's Chairman of Elmstead Parish Council. Adam, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. And on behalf of Elmstead Parish Council, I will just start by repeating myself from, I believe it was the meeting before last, when we were reassured we could soon stop saying the Tendring Colchester Borders Garden Community because the name was in the works. 18 months later now, and we're still stuck with the tongue twister that is TCBGC. It's becoming quite a serious placemaking failure, as a lot of locals simply know it as the new town, despite the confusion that causes with Colchester New Town. And it would be very nice to get a solution to that sooner rather than later. I'll try to keep the rest of this response brief, but I would just like to point out that given the date of the last meeting, which was 11 months ago, it does seem slightly concerning that the parish council has only got 5 minutes out of the entire year effectively to engage in this way, which will be relevant going forwards. I'd query how transparent and democratic this is, as it seems like there must be an awful lot of decisions being made in private which are lacking proper public scrutiny in meetings such as this. Being on the receiving end of local public opinion on a daily basis, and given the failures in effective public engagement previously acknowledged, it's becoming increasingly hard to defend this planning approach. We're concerned especially that the delegations proposed in Report A2 only move more decision-making behind closed doors. I'd appreciate in the grand scheme of things such decisions may seem inconsequential, but by delegating such powers to be decided by officers, that's preventing the residents who will be most affected, such as those represented by SEAG, coming to meetings such as this and saying their piece with the local knowledge when detailed planning matters are being decided. Elmstead Parish Council had a meeting last month with the appointed garden community placemaking consultant, and he was rather taken aback at the strength of negative public feeling surrounding the project. I'm quite worried at the difference between the community liaison group and what we're hearing on a daily basis. There's obviously some disconnect there. Hopefully, Community Stewardship Solutions feel that back to everyone in detail, and Elmstead Parish Council has offered to work with them going forwards. I reiterate what I've said before, public opinion on this project is getting worse and not better. A week doesn't go by when members of the public don't comment that the whole scheme has already been decided, so there's no point engaging. We need far more transparency, not less. This hasn't been helped by a disappointing start of the summer when the first material works for the project, which is seemingly so focused on sustainability, began by cutting down hundreds of hedgerow trees during bird nesting season, only for no more work to happen in the months since. There was the remains of eggshells in the remnants of the hedge, and I'd quite like an answer from someone as to if the correct wildlife assessment was done before that, and why it was done at the time it was, instead of now when it would have been much safer to do so. People in Elmstead and now beyond are only just starting to feel the impact of the development as work commences. The disruption the rapid transport system and soon the link road construction will have is just the beginning, but already we're having residents quite rightfully complaining of delays and traffic problems. As one parishioner put to me recently, these works are taking half an hour out of his day every day for the next year or more, not for his benefit, not for the benefit of anyone in Elmstead, Alresford, Wivenhoe, Brightlingsea, Bentley, Bromley. I could go on. There's tens of thousands of people who have to move through Clingo Hill and the Hythe on a regular basis and are facing severe disruption. This is over the next few years, and for work they'll get no benefit of, as the rapid transport system extends no further to these communities. Indeed, local back roads over the last few weeks have seen noticeably more traffic. I don't believe the traffic assessments considered the immediate impact at this time of the construction, and especially the simultaneous construction we could see of the rapid transport system and link road. We're seeing new rat runs form almost by the day, and complaints of regular dangerous driving on already precarious country lanes. It's disappointing there hasn't been more consideration put in for the current traffic management of the surrounding road network, and we fear the situation will only improve after serious accidents show how bad things have become, and they are starting to happen in the previous days. It doesn't say much for the robust evidence-based approach to traffic modelling when the current traffic modelling isn't being played out as expected. A word of warning to Colchester City Council in particular, as we're already hearing a significant amount of people, not just from Elmstead, but all the way from Ardleigh to Brightlingsea, more households than the garden community will ever hold, explaining that they're choosing to go to Clacton, Manningtree, even Ipswich to avoid traffic problems getting into Colchester. So much for reducing car usage when I can drive a 30-mile round trip to Ipswich as fast as I can drive the 3 miles to here. The journey used to take 20 minutes. We tonight had to allow an hour. You're certainly taking your life in your own hands if you want to try to cycle from Elmstead to Colchester. We're not as lucky as Wivenhoe having a cycle path. Lanes that saw so little motorised traffic in the past, they were basically a cycle lane, and now a steady stream of cars. It seems a monumental step backwards, given the scheme's aspirations for active travel. Worse yet is people are forming habits of taking these routes, and after a year or more of avoiding Clingo Hill and the Hythe, the traffic modelling will become less relevant as people's habits are already changing. Someone needs to look at the wider road situation and take action ASAP. Finally, I do just want to address, there's a lot of misinformation going around. I know we've already talked about the link road, but we keep on being asked the same questions, and unfortunately we get different answers. Can anyone confirm who is building the second stage of the link road, or is that still undecided? More importantly, there's figures going around, especially in the press, which may not be overly helpful, but ranging from 20 million to 60 million. That's quite a massive funding gap for phase 2. When it's ultimately public money, I think it's only fair that cost is transparent. So can anyone get a closer estimate? I'm sure given the amount of time in the future it's not going to be definite, but to the nearest 10 million.
Thank you. I gave you a couple of minutes over because I wanted to hear you finish, and I hope you feel you have. On which basis, a couple of reflections from me, if I may, and I'll go to our officers. That's the way we do this, and I know you'd expect that. So the first thing I think I have to say for all of us, and I'm aware fellow members who have always struggled in recent times to get down Clingo Hill, and all the works that are happening, they'll have to be frank about it, making life more difficult. And for us collectively, I and we have to be sorry for that. We have to trust that the investment will bring a benefit, but have to hear you and hear others in pointing out that the cost, the consequence, the challenge in the near term. Now that's just words, but I know that our county and highways officers will take on board what they're hearing and picking up from other sources. They get a lot of direct public commentary as well, and they do go back and look at how they're organising it. I speak with some experience in this because I've had the pleasure of having the first section of the rapid transport system, the bus lanes, go through my ward and division in North Colchester, and the only words to be used are it's been a nightmare. Now, the fact that it's rather different in terms of an urban developed area is the principle and the point's the same. That if you do works, it's true elsewhere in Colchester, Ipswich Road as an example, you get a benefit, but there is a period of disruption. And I think the key for us is make sure that we are listening as we do, try to do, and make that as minimal as possible, and that we feed back and address the points that we can address. Some of them perhaps we can't. So I'm going to go, Jonathan, no surprise to you. Could you pick up what we can say in terms of facts and myths? And there are a lot, and I suspect we're going to have a few more in a minute. Things that get said that aren't true or misunderstanding. But can we talk about contract status just a little bit? Who's doing what? And the costings, I don't think we're in a position to, but you can perhaps talk to when we're going to be getting those costings. And then the principle is clear that when we can, we don't give away commercially valuable information. Here's a large sum of money. Oh dear, your price has risen. But we have to be open and transparent. The principle's there. So would you see what you can say? And then we'll see where that leaves us. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll also start by picking up the specific query on whether the enabling works for the rapid transit scheme, section C, which is the bit which is on site now between Greenstead Roundabout and Knowledge Gateway Junction, were undertaken properly. And there's also been some Link Road Phase 1 enabling works that took place on the A133 as well. So the timing of that work was designed to avoid the peak bird nesting season, where those clearances of vegetation did have to take place. I understand that the protocol that we've had to follow and did follow is that an ecologist is on site at the time to make sure that those clearances do not disrupt nesting birds. So I can provide assurance, and if there's more detail needed, I can go back and ask for more detail than that. But that is something we were alert to and monitored at the time, and did mitigate and follow in accordance with our duty to do so. In terms of the existing schemes which are on site and undertaking works, so we have Milestone delivering section C of the RTS on Clinger Hill. As I mentioned, we have Octavius as our contractor to begin the phase 1 of the Link Road construction. We're fully conscious that those are simultaneous. They will need sequencing and phasing. There's also National Highways works on the A120 at various points. So we are in conversation to make sure that where possible, we avoid conflicts between those works and we minimize the overall impact. We are obviously concerned if any of the diversions and traffic management interventions are causing issues in safety. That tends to be the number one priority for the Highways Authority, to ensure that any works that take place don't result in unacceptable safety impacts. So all of those accidents kind of should be, and I'm sure will be, reported, and changes can be made if they are needed to be made to those traffic management arrangements. The two specific questions: who is building the second phase of the Link Road? So the obligation is on the developer of the Garden Community Latimer to fund the delivery of the Link Road. That's outlined in the MOU between the councils and Latimer, which forms part of the evidence base in the public domain for the DPD. There's also an assumption in the wider evidence base for the DPD, such as the infrastructure phasing plan and the viability assessment, that that's a cost that falls to Latimer. And your question on what is the cost of building phase 2 is brought into that same conversation. So the DPD evidence base is the best place to look for the best indications we have. And the figure that's in there is £21.5 million for phase 2 of the Link Road. As we discussed at the DPD examination hearings, we don't necessarily assume that by the time the Link Road is constructed, following the development programme for the planning application, for the build out of the garden community, analysis of when it's needed, that will end up being the final price that Latimer funds. As David alluded to, there are also ongoing conversations with government about seeking potential further funding to help deliver a high quality garden community that we all want. But we are not producing up-to-date estimates every month or every year on phase 2 of the link road. The obligation of any applicant who wants to build the garden community is that they need to demonstrate a commitment to funding at the point that the planning application is determined, and that therefore implies that they would need to propose a viable scheme overall and outline what their contribution would be. I would also say that's the funding picture. It's also possible that in these arrangements, a developer can fund a county council to deliver the programme, the project itself, or a developer can deliver the project themselves with the relevant kind of approvals and oversight and agreement of a county council. So there isn't a set position on it will be Latimer's contract or Essex County Council contract or a government agency issuing the contract. That is open for now, I would say.
Thank you very much indeed. And as you go, I'll just say we all are here also about the challenge about being democratic and open. All I can say is our presence here is demonstration we're doing our best to do that. We publish everything that matters. I do wish sometimes we could all go off in a small huddle and make every decision that matters. It will be wrong, but it'll be done. It's just not how it works. So, indeed, the publication, the modifications ahead of consultation and the independent inspector going back to the task again is, I think, demonstration of that. But I understand the sentiment, and I'm sure members here of the Joint Committee do as well. So thank you for holding us to task in that constructive way. Thank you very much indeed. Right, we have a statement from the Mayor of Wivenhoe. It's been widely publicised. I think it's been in the press, and there's been a response to it. So, but she's asked that this be read out, and I'll ask Mr. Weavers to my left to do so.
Thank you, Chairman. So the following is a statement from Councillor Denise Burke, Mayor of Wivenhoe, who intended to be present at this meeting but is not able to be present tonight. As Mayor of Wivenhoe, I would like to share my concerns regarding the proposed Tendring garden community. Firstly, there needs to be a reality check as work begins on what has been dubbed the road to nowhere. The work began on the link road for the proposed Tendring garden community this week, the start of the new school term, which will see over 7,500 homes built. Little notice was given for the works, diversion signs are totally inadequate, and overnight closures are ad hoc, not adhering to the closure and opening times advertised. The alternative routes are congested and already heavy with lorries on these narrow roads. In the trigger point analysis of November 2023, it identified a trigger point when a full link road is needed. It shows that the journey time and queuing impacts on the A133 will worsen as development increases, with a step change at 4,000 homes. It also concedes that the network is already heavily congested. However, this summary is highly deceptive because the modelling for the 4,000 homes trigger reflects eastbound queues only. The westbound queue commences earlier at 1,000 homes, so we may get a link road in 20 years' time, assuming their quite extreme predictions on modal shift will work. What is interesting and frustrating is Essex County Council has and remains very reluctant to share the document to a wider audience. They add in the environmental impact assessment scoping report produced by the developer for the new town. It is assumed that phase 2 of the link road is constructed at the back end of the emerging local plan review period. Therefore, the assessment year is 2041. We are supposedly reassured that in 2041, the rapid transit system and park and choose will be operational, although details of service routing, frequency and fleet are yet to be developed. However, they warned the plan remains fundamentally flawed, with the timetable for the vital infrastructure required for a development of this scale still not agreed or announced. It leaves leaving scheme in real danger of creating a huge need for healthcare, schooling and other amenities, which at present there is no compulsion on the developer or local authorities to deliver. There are lots of unresolved problems with the plan that can no longer be passed off as having garden community principles. In addition, the employment area can't come forward because Latimer doesn't own the land and the link road doesn't link to it. The timescale for delivery of schools and early year provision has been watered down, and so the infrastructure will be constantly trying to catch up with house delivery as opposed to the infrastructure first principle we were promised. There is currently no healthcare planned for the site. As someone who works in the early years and childcare and elder care industry, I have to ask why the proposed plan does not reflect cradle to grave solutions that will be needed early on, as neighbouring towns and parishes have insufficient facilities. Indeed, in Wivenhoe, demand already exceeds supply. The heritage impact assessment was done after the master planning, so heritage elements have just been ignored. The promised green buffers, which are so vital to ensure environmental requirements can be met, can be filled by car parks, solar farms, cemeteries and allotments. The total number of homes has gone up from 7,500 total, with an additional 2,700 student beds on site. There is still no stewardship model, so we don't know if there will be a boundary change, and Latimer wants a land or service charge, which are very unpopular with residents. In summary, although of course the most unacceptable element is the lack of a link road or credible rapid transport system, we know next to nothing about the rapid transit system, but the link road delivery is hampered by significant obstacles, such as the fact that Essex County Council still don't own the land to build phase 2. People should be told national highways have outstanding and unresolved issues with traffic modelling and design. The announcement of work might seem as a positive, but the fact remains, as it stands, there is no money left to build phase 2, and there is no legally binding way to get the developer to contribute. At present, all we are seeing is the start of construction for a road to nowhere. Those charged with delivery still have no idea how or when the multitude of issues which currently make this scheme an expensive and embarrassing white elephant will be addressed, and workable and practicable solutions found. That's the end of the statement, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much. There's some lengthy explanatory responses that are out there in a press release from the 3 local authorities. I know highways in particular have points of detail that they could pick to, but if I might, Jonathan, to help, I think what I suggest we do is pick up unless you really want to, I was going to suggest we just pick up a few other points, but if you want to start, and then I'll see what else we might want to add. Did you want to do that?
Yeah, I think, thank you, Chair. You've alluded to the statement from Councillor Denise Burke also being kind of put in the public domain as a press release, and there is a joint statement from Essex County Council, Tendring Council and Colchester Council that I thought it may be helpful simply to rehearse here. I won't go into the editor's notes. It's about 6 paragraphs. It'll be much shorter than this statement. Shall I proceed with that? So the joint statement reads, there are a number of inaccuracies and misunderstandings in the press release from Wivenhoe Town Council, including the position of National Highways and incorrect assertions that statutory processes for technical work and approvals have not been followed, as well as the information not accurately reflecting the technical work that has been done to date. And references to the full editor's notes is provided. The 3 partner councils are committed to ensuring agreed infrastructure is delivered as early as feasibly possible at the Tendring Colchester Borders Garden Community, and will be requiring such commitments from developers when determining future planning applications. A joint committee of the 3 councils has been established early in the development process to ensure comprehensive public oversight of the planning process. The councils were successful in attracting almost £100 million of government funding for early delivery of new transport infrastructure to support much needed new housing at the garden community. And this is in the form of the new A1331 and the new Colchester Rapid Transit System. Adopted planning policy clearly requires that the funding for the full A1331, linking the A133 and 120, is in place before planning approval is granted for the garden community. The development plan document also sets out requirement for the garden community to demonstrate a full funding commitment to complete the A1331. The councils are totally committed to securing the funding for the full delivery of the A1331, which is fundamental to planned housing growth in Colchester and Tendring, The councils are therefore working with the new government to explore funding opportunities to complete the A1331. We appreciate that while there are understandable concerns as to the impacts of new housing on Wivenhoe and other surrounding areas, the planning and highway authorities have put in place strong safeguards to ensure growth is well managed, sustainable, and enhances the local community. We are keen to work with the local parish and town councils as the schemes continue to progress through the planning system.
Thank you. I'm conscious of time. We've gone past 7 already. I hope that helps. And I hope that the Mayor has the opportunity to read in the detail. But there is a point I want to accept on behalf, if I may, of the Joint Committee, which is concerns about promises that are absolutely not watered down being delivered is absolutely understandable. You know, it's our collective job to ensure that in holding each other to account, and with every respect to our friends from Latimer, we will need to see and need to gain the assurance that's required to make the promise demonstrable. So that's our challenge. It's misreading is always, in my view, partly our problem, because we have to continue to work out being really clear to address what is fact, a legitimate question, what is myth or rumour, and we have to continue to work at that. We have some excellent notes and statements and documents on our engagement website, and I know many here will have looked at it or regularly do. We have to continue to address these kind of issues. And it's not true that we've watered down health provision or infrastructure, or that we're not going to have a link road because this whole project doesn't happen without it. But we have to keep saying why and with what confidence we can assure the public that the things that matter most, to which the Mayor has alluded, will happen with least impact to existing communities. I'll stop at that. Please, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Chair. I was just going to say a couple of quick things on the subject of openness, if I might. The first is that a number, if not, I think almost the majority of the points that have been made from the floor were addressed in several respects in the minutes of our meeting. I think it's paragraph 5, but in relation in particular to matters relating to the link road. I would urge members of the public to actually read the minutes of the meetings if they're not able to be at the meeting, or if they need to refresh their memories, because I think there's an awful lot of information here quite understand. I have to do that in order to get to grips with this matter. And the second thing would be, I quite agree that in the interest of time you wouldn't want to go to the notes, but I would urge people to go to the notes to editors on that, because they deal with some of the individual points that have been raised. The press release itself deals with the generality, but those notes are really helpful, I think, on that point, and give people a better starting point, perhaps, for any further concerns they want to raise with us. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Andrea, that's important.
Just as a point of order, when the comments were submitted for the DPD, Highways England had in green, because I remember thinking it was quite a nice colour, object written to it. They did object to the DPD. And, you know, I could bring up all the documents here of all the grounds that they objected to it, but it was an objection. They may not have objected to the original planning application, but they objected to the DPD. Otherwise, they wouldn't have been allowed to have a seat at the table, and they did have one. So, as a point of order, that is incorrect. I think the other point is that there is a statement of common ground where, at the end of it, it details all the issues that they feel are unresolved. They are working with you, they are trying to resolve them, but there are unresolved issues.
Thank you. The latter is, to me, well worth saying, because clearly in something as complex as this, with all the intersections that lie ahead and the work lies ahead, to say that there's stuff to do and be clear about, absolutely well said. Can I just go to the first point, which is about the formality of objections and how impacted through the process? I understood that to be a passing moment, but perhaps you might pick it up, Jonathan. Or Amy Lester, thank you.
So in terms of the consultation and the engagement we have had with National Highways, running through the preparation of the DPD and towards the examination period, and through all of the consultations that we've run, National Highways England have engaged with us throughout that process. The statement of common ground that was prepared as part of the examination process does, at the end of it, raise a number of outstanding issues. However, these relate to the future planning application and the modelling work which will be required to come forward as part of that. So those are quite understandable areas of concern and matters of note that have been recorded as still needing to be resolved. However, the principle of the garden community and the DPD and the policies contained with it, National Highways England have not objected to that principle.
Thank you, Councillor Scott. I think the key point is the word object. The reservations are inevitable, and every party to this endeavour has reservations, even the most constructive and positive of them. Could we pick up on that specific?
Can I come back in? I'm not suggesting they object to the principle, but they objected to the DPD. You said yourself, Amy, you cannot get a seat at the table unless you object to every single policy, so that they were allowed to sit at the table. That table, unless you object to the Reg 19.
Thank you. I think for this is thank you. It's helpful to have the point said. I personally understand it that really matters. You want to be there if you've got a role, and they do. I think the key is how that word into lay sense is taken. So could we just talk to both of those points? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I will quote from not in full, but from the published document, which is the Statement of Common Ground between National Highways and the councils. So Councillor Luxford-Vaughan is correct that in order to participate in the hearings at the Reg 19 stage, one must put forward a consultation response that includes a holding objection in the case of National Highways. The process then of engagement is about finding that common ground. So in section 3 of that document, which is the Statement of Common Ground, it says, in summary, the councils and National Highways agree that the DPD transport evidence base, which uses the Colchester transport model developed by Essex County Council, provides a sound strategic transport baseline for future development at the garden community. They agree that outstanding matters raised in the National Highways technical notes 7, 8 and 9 and responses by the councils are deemed to be acceptable at this stage for the DPD. And as my colleague Amy Lester said, they acknowledge the need to continue working collaboratively and with the site developers to deliver the full range of suitable highway and transportation solutions for the garden community. And in conclusion, the statement says, under unresolved issues, within this Statement of Common Ground, there are no unresolved issues or area of uncommon ground for the purposes of the DPD. There are several notable issues that need to be resolved prior to the planning application stage. So for the purposes of the DPD, as it has progressed through examination and in the run-up to examination, Statements of Common Ground are designed to close areas of disagreement, which in this case has been done. There are no outstanding issues for National Highways in regards to the DPD.
Thank you. I think that's a very helpful exchange, an insight into process and where we're at. I'll tell you what I hear most. It's a sound baseline at this stage. You know, there's a long way to go. Thank you. That's a very helpful exchange. I'm going to stop there unless colleagues feel that they need to pull out any particular additional point. Okay, thank you. We could read into record every single response, but there's quite a lot of it. I hope we've got across that there is a different perspective, but I repeat, there's a duty on us to make sure that we continue to press home that need not only to look, fair point taken, Councillor Wackland, to look at the published evidence and positioning, but also for us to continue to work. And we do work really hard at engagement and explanation. Thank you very much. That is almost it, but there is one colleague lurking on the left. Councillor Mark Corey, you're our final speaker, Mark. Please come forward.
Good evening, David and committee. Going last, I think sometimes you try and curtail as some of the questions. I may repeat some points, I apologise. But I do support the comments made by Councillor Adam Gladwin and Councillor Denise Burke about the current traffic situation, and being the divisional member most affected by the roadworks at the moment, I would say I am dealing with highways about the lack of diversion signs that happened at the start of this week, accidents that have already happened, and also the map that was produced, which was a tiny little image that did not help the public whatsoever. So if you're going to start these projects, you need to start on the right foot, and that's already failed. Question 1 for me relates to recent traffic modelling by ECC, which shows that the eastbound congestion at Clingo Hill becomes significantly a problem after 1,000 new homes. Those homes are going to come from Tendring itself, but also from the garden community. So how comes when it's already going to be a significant issue at 1,000 homes? Why, in our phasing evidence, when it says we should have a full link road delivered by the end of the plan period 2023, why is it that 2041 is now the reported date for the earliest starting of the road? Or even 2051 by its operational completion? The principles of the garden community demand a full link road, but the facts now show it is needed from the start. The two parts just remain absolutely unacceptable to me as a resident and a representative of the Wivenhoe St Andrew division. Question 2. Is it the case that nothing from the leftover HIF funding can be spent towards the construction costs post 2026? Question 3, what are the phase 2 costs? And we have heard earlier that there's no up-to-date costs at the moment. So I'm worried about that question not being able to be answered. But without updated costs of phase 2, how does this affect our own viability evidence? How can we say that it's going to stack up for the planning application without any costs associated or any estimates at this point? Question 4, what capital resources are set aside by Latimer for building phase 2? How can we assure that this is being prepared for and will be done and delivery ensured? Question 5, the traffic modelling showing traffic increasing, the pains of the project so far and the bad press, and the speed of the supposedly rapid transport system being watered down to fast. How do we expect the modal shift targets to be met? It looks less than likely that they will be achieved now. So in policy terms, what is there in policy terms to ensure that modal shift happens? And if it does not happen, is there a mechanism to stop the building of further homes because modal shift has not been achieved? Those are all my questions relating to comments from residents and colleagues. But the one further point I'll make is about report A2. I very much support the comments made by Councillor Adam Gladwin about the sort of vacuum of decisions that the public see on this committee. I know Councillor Guglielmi usually says that he's the one who's been here from the very start, but if he's not here this evening, I can claim that. And now I feel less connected to the project overall. I feel that the delegation of further responsibility would be a misstep at this point. This committee, in my eyes, is already a delegated committee from the councils. There's a limited number of councillors on this committee, so you already have powers delegated to you and have that responsibility sitting with you. And lastly, David, you talked about assurance and holding to account. I think delegating further decisions away will be less than helpful, delegating further decisions away from you as representatives. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mark. And yes, you have followed this closely and for a long time, and we all value your perspective and your counsel on this. We'll deal with the delegation point, hearing you and others in favour as well, I should hasten to add, when we get to that item. But I will say, because we were going to say it again, we're following good practice with that delegation, the practice that's applied at Colchester. And to your charge, because it is a challenge to us, do we take seriously our responsibilities as a joint committee to represent the interests of both full councils, indeed all three full councils. If you were here, you'd say, as I now will, of course we do. There is not a vacuum. There has just been a long process in which the board has been resting, frankly, with the inspector. A long preparation process that's prepared him, and a long pause while we wait for him. Then we have the consultation that lies ahead. So the committee, much as I said to Adam earlier, might love to be making, frying up something in the back room, but we are in a period not of suspension because things are happening, but we're in a period where the momentum rests upon the process that puts this matter in the hands of others. Now, soon it will come back after the consultation. It's going out to the public's hands and their views. Then it's the planning inspector. We can't jump ahead of that process. I hope you'll understand that. Therefore, that affects what we can do and what we can share. But the challenge of transparency, absolutely, we get it. Now, your 5 points, with respect, I think just about all of them, and I know you're an acute listener, have been touched on in some sort of fashion. I don't think it right to try and hold Latimer to account about their capital provision for a project that is early stages. That's for them. They know, it's been touched on today several times, they know this project does not happen without the link road. And the conversation about how that gets funded, whether the government helps more or the current responsibility resting with them has to be delivered by them. That's where we're at. I doubt if anything else could be said, and unless they volunteer, I'm not going to ask them in this place at this time for a view on their capital resources. I don't think you'd expect me to, but they'll have heard you. They're only a few yards away from you. So I'm sure the message is understood about the challenge of, if you like, their viability as our developer to deliver on their promise. The points about costs and unpacking and estimating are well made and understood. What I'll do, rather than, if you won't mind, given we have gone through this, I'll just ask Jonathan, is there anything that you want to pull out? But please make it by exception, as in addition to what's been said. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll make additional points on top of what I've shared earlier. I think it's important to say on the record that it is not the case that we have a report which says that 2041 is the earliest date at which phase 2 of the link road would be delivered. We have modelling studies which illustrate different scenarios which are designed, have been commissioned to inform other public decision-making processes, namely the CPO and the SRO. So that is not the basis on which this committee would determine an application and indeed take a view on what acceptable impacts of that application would be in environmental terms, in highways terms, and in accordance with statutory planning processes. Very quickly, question 2, is it the case that HIF cannot be used beyond March 2026? Yes, that's the case, contractually. On phase 2 costs, you've mentioned, David, viability would be scrutinised by this committee at the point of the submission of the planning application, and that viability assessment would need to include the major infrastructure costs, including those phase 2 costs. As well as your point on Latimer capital resources, I'll defer to monitoring officers and planning expert colleagues next to me if I've got this wrong, but I don't think it's an applicable criteria for determining a planning application to say to the applicant, have you got the money to build it? And on the 5th point, how to meet modal shift targets, I will take debate on the semantic issue of rapid versus fast. I remember the inspector going through this, and he was seeking some elegant synonyms, and he avoided saying that the creation of the rapid transit system would enable rapid commutes because he felt that was self-evident. So there is not a lot in that wording change from what the inspector was thinking when he introduced that change. But the point is serious on modal shift targets. There is the potential, if the committee wanted to, in determining the application, to introduce development caps if they felt that there were controls they needed to put on the build out. And if the level of traffic generated, which is the other side of the same coin as the modal shift, was of a certain level, that cap could be introduced at the discretion of the committee. Yes, that's an option.
Thank you. I hope that latter point is a really helpful one. I think we haven't said that tonight, but I know you will have heard both now and earlier, the committee's view is pretty much the same. We expect the link road, we expect the promises of DPD to be delivered. We know that we're going to have fresh modelling. We know that fresh modelling is going to have to look against an expectation of realism, against good practice, what's been delivered elsewhere. So there's going to be changes ahead, and I hope that will give you, Mark, and colleagues some assurance. Thank you very much for your time. I'm conscious of time, but I'm going to press ahead if I may, because I should say this for not everybody will be aware. Those at home will be watching thinking, well, that's certainly right, but I understand the A12 is closing tonight at 8 o'clock. And I know that some have got long distances to go. I don't have the details of that. I confess I have a bike. I'm contributing to modal shift in the rain, I suspect. Well, that will serve me right. But you may see some members may have to go given those long journeys, but we'll watch the clock and watch the time, and with the discretion of members, if anybody needs a personal break, then please take one. But what I'd like to do, if we can tend, is press ahead for at least for now. There's a plan. That's welcome news, and you heard it here. Right, I'm now going to expect that some of my colleagues will be desperately looking at their phones, trying to work out what that means for them. But I'll leave that to colleagues, and we'll just press on. So thank you very much for all those who have taken the time and trouble to come here to speak so well, so eloquently. I hope we've given good return to your time and effort. Let's go to report A1, which is the examination in public, the inspector's modification, that huge pack that lies under here, which I know many heard in person, some heard in person, and the rest of us, I know, have clawed our way through it. It is, in my view, accompanied, it is, if you've read it, understandable in my view, in the sense it describes what it's about, and it's a language, mostly it's language, minor language changes, but I've always say those things matter. With a covering piece, so we're not going to go through this at length. We'll be here all at night. We're going to make the assumption of understanding around the room, but we will have a brief presentation overview from Amy Lester. Amy, please. Thank you.
Thank you. Can the slides be brought up, please? Thank you. The purpose of this report is to advise the Joint Committee of the modifications to the development plan document that the planning inspector requires the councils to publish for consultation. Following the hearing sessions held in May of this year, the inspector has recommended modifications he considers necessary to make the plan sound. In total, there are 88 modifications which will be consulted on. In advance of the hearing sessions, the inspector requested that the councils prepare a schedule of modifications. This provided a list of changes to the DPD resulting from a review of the Regulation 19 representations, the preparation of statements of common ground with statutory bodies and key stakeholders, and through the identification of errors in the drafting of the submission version of the DPD. None of the modifications within the schedule of suggested modifications were significant in that they did not seek to change the substance or intent of DPD policy. As part of each hearing session, the inspector reviewed and asked for comment on each modification suggested, relating to the relevant policy being considered as part of that hearing session. The inspector has subsequently issued his own schedule of modifications as appended to the report at Appendix 1, and has instructed the councils to proceed to consultation. The modifications issued by the inspector have been summarised in Part 3 of the report. They do not vary significantly from the suggested modifications that were discussed at the hearings. In accordance with regulation requirements, the councils have updated the sustainability appraisal and habitats regulations assessment. This is to take account of the modifications. These are statutory documents which are required for publication alongside the modifications. Taken as a whole, the sustainability appraisal concludes that the DPD, with the inspector's modification, sets out a positive plan for the achievement of the garden community. The policies of the plan set a high standard which development will be required to meet, and it is considered consistent with the principles of sustainable development. The review of the HRA, the Habitats Regulation Assessment, concludes that the modifications to the DPD will not have any adverse effects on the integrity of any habitat sites. Members will note that 4 changes to the suggested schedule of modifications have been made by the inspector. I will go through each of these changes now for further clarity. Modification MM90 relates to policy GC2. This relates to biodiversity net gain, and the inspector's modification was to remove reference to the ambition to achieve BNG of 15%. The reason for this modification being suggested by the inspector is that the minimum requirement of 10% will be met across the master plan as required by legislation. The second modification I'm just going to go through is MM71, which relates to GC Policy 8, Sustainable Infrastructure. The inspector has changed the timeframe for an agreed strategy to achieve net zero in exceptional circumstances from within a reasonable timeframe to within 5 years of occupation. This was at the request of Latimer, and it was discussed in depth on day one of the hearing sessions. MM72 again relates to GC Policy 8, Sustainable Infrastructure. This modification was suggested by the councils, and it was not agreed by the inspector and put forward for consultation. So the councils had put forward for consideration that the space heating, energy consumption and renewable energy generation standards be updated to reflect the findings of the most up-to-date technical evidence base and ensure alignment with the Essex Design Guide. The inspector has not agreed the council's suggested modification, as the Essex Design Guide is not part of the development plan. Therefore, he considers the suggested modification not reasonable and would be likely to create issues in relation to deliverability. This modification will therefore not go forward for consultation, and the standards under Part A of GC Policy 8 will remain in the DPD as outlined within the submission plan. Lastly, MM91 relates to GC Policy 9, which is Infrastructure Delivery, Impact Mitigation and Monitoring. The inspector's modification is to remove all references to Community Infrastructure Levy. The reason being that the Community Infrastructure Levy charging schedule will be considered separately from the DPD. As required and instructed by the inspector, officers intend to consult on all 88 of the modifications for 6 weeks during September and October. All relevant comments received during the consultation period will be considered by the inspector, and representations will be provided to the inspector in their full format. Whilst the receipt of the inspector's modifications does not constitute a judgment on the legal compliance and soundness of the DPD, it is a positive step in the examination process. Furthermore, the fact that the modifications provided by the inspector do not vary significantly from those that were discussed at the examination hearings would suggest that no fundamental issues requiring more significant changes have been identified at present. However, it will ultimately be for the inspector to confirm whether or not this is the case once he has considered any further representations on the modifications and determined whether or not the DPD, with or without certain modifications, is legally compliant and sound. Only on confirmation of the legal compliance and soundness of the plan following the examination process can the councils proceed to formal adoption. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. I will allow some limited comments. The reason I say limited, because this is a stage long published, long in the making, where we hand it on to the public. We cannot, as a committee, and I just say this for the record, change, add a commentary, alter anything that's here. This is the inspector's obligation on us to put this out to consultation ahead of his further examination, and then what will follow, which we're at that point, at that later stage, will involve the committee. So comments from members I ask to be restricted on that sensible basis. We've been around this before, but this is the inspector's show from my perspective. Councillor Luxford-Vaughan.
Yeah, I mean, although in principle there's inspectors' modifications, obviously they have come, as you explained, from statements of common ground with statutory consultees and the developer. I just wanted to say, for a matter of public record, they were not agreed via this committee. So if you don't like them, don't blame us as individual councillors. And I would also say, for the record, I agree with one of our previous speakers that I do think that some of them are creating significant changes to the DPD. Basically, you're going from having a link road to a non-link road, and the justification has come through one of those modifications. That is a significant. Basically, it stops it being a sustainable site, which I'm bitterly disappointed is not picked up in the sustainability appraisal. But the sustainability appraisal has had its flaws from the beginning, that it didn't consider congestion as one of its measurements, which we've argued long and hard with the Section 1 inspector that should have been in there. It's in the MPPF. It's baffling that it was left out. That's the end of my comment.
Thank you. Councillor Somers.
Yes, first of all, I don't think there's any hope of getting through that traffic before 8 o'clock, given that we've got another substantive point to cover. So could we possibly have a comfort break after this item?
Absolutely, William. I think that will fit with those who have no choice but to travel.
I am a veteran of backups on the A12 and the A120, so I'm expecting to have to wiggle through country lanes as I have to so many nights. Going to these amendments, it's quite clear that Amy is right that the inspector is going to wave this through, and all the major points were postponed onto the planning application. So that was completely clear. There was one thing that I took some comfort from, and that is he made it completely clear in main modification 75 that the infrastructure phasing and delivery plan was a requirement and was linked in, and that any variation to it would have to be explained by the developer with evidence provided. I think that's really important. And I was a bit concerned that that seemed to have slipped earlier in this meeting when we were told that the phasing was indicative only. That is not the case in my mind. We've got a phasing plan that promises us a whole load of infrastructure, and if that's not delivered, then we at the committee are not doing our job.
Thank you. And that actually, that does, I'll just say briefly, I think that rounds out the earlier remarks and the conversation tonight. There's real substance here, but you're right, challenges lie ahead. Right. Thank you very much, William. Councillor Andy Baker.
Thank you, Chairman. Just a couple of comments, if I may. Page 2930, the modifications consultation summary plan. There's no mention in there of the four, or I'm not sure if Elmstead has its, I'm not sure if Greenstead has its own parish council, but they're mentioned within the report somewhere. I would just like to make sure that those parish and town councils that are affected, are within, have been concerned with this, Elmstead, Ardley, Wivenhoe. There's no mention that the inspector's modifications, all these, are going to be made available to them. So just an ask of officers that they ensure that they are included, because they're vitally important. We've heard from Elmstead Market, and I know how concerned some are at Ardley as well. So, and another comment would be, we're live. Anybody who is concerned about this, make a representation. That's what it's all about. The consultation, it's 6 weeks. You have the chance to make a comment on anything in there. Please do so, because that's what the inspector is there for, to take those concerns in his considerations. I don't think it's, as Councillor Sonic said, it will be waved through. I would hope that the planning inspector takes great care, because we need to get it right. And on that note, Chair, I'm quite happy to move the recommendation as it is on page 22.
Thank you. Can I have, as set out on page 22, or perhaps say it for the record, that the Tendring Colchester Borders Garden Community Joint Committee notes the contents of this report, the inspector's schedule modifications, which are attached to Appendix 1, notes the next stage of the examination process, which is to publish the schedule on modifications for public consultation. Are we so agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you. We'll close that item. We'll take a 10-minute break. And for those, Lee, you might want to talk to this, who've got a very difficult journey ahead. A quick word.
Yeah, just to explain and apologise. While we've been sitting here tonight, I was notified of a family member who's been taken ill. So I'm going to have to sit in the traffic to try and get through. So please, will you accept my forgiveness? Apologies.
Thank you. And we wish you and your family well. Thank you very much. Thank you both for coming tonight. I'm told we're not caught. I'm sorry. I've asked for absent members to be encouraged to return. I think we're almost there. So we'll give that a moment. What I suggest we do as we wait is make a start in the conversation. Well, I'll start with the easy bit, which is to remind us of where we're going next on the agenda. Okay, thank you very much. We're all back and present. So we've worked our way through, and I heard some frustration being muttered. So I'm going to address it directly. Look, we all care about each other, and if we don't, we should. So for those of us who've got personal challenges, if we could stop the sidebar conversations, please, and then we would understand that getting on with our business live to that is just the right thing to go and do. But it is important that differences of view are aired here for the record, and because members who devote countless hours to sometimes tedious stuff, let's be frank, deserve the opportunity to say what they want. So thank you for those who stayed with us. We're down to the final item, which is report A2, delegation to officers in respect of EIA scoping requests. And this seeks the agreement to the committee to delegate specific decision-making powers to officers related to determining the scope of the issues needing to be covered in an environmental statement, and then we describe what the regulations and platform background is for that. Amy, was something you wanted to say, but could we keep that as brief as possible? Thank you.
I have got a presentation prepared. However, if members would prefer, everyone will have read the report on the joint committee, and I will be happy to respond to questions and the debate as it goes along if you would prefer it to be, and that can be dealt in that way.
Thank you. I would prefer it to be done in that way because I'm sure members have read this, and those interested, those here today, will have done it. The only point I would make before I open this up, I've made before. This is what we do elsewhere. It's what we do in both our planning committees. We accept the role of officers, mindful, and put it as simply as possible, all the things that matter, including the planning applications, plural ahead, have to come to the committee. There is a proposition, I ought to read that now, reflecting conversations between members for a minor adjustment. There's a little bit of extra reinforcement. So when we get to the description and the recommendation on page 262 for those following it, it will be the addition of 2 lines in the middle. So after we talk about the exercise of powers of delegation, we add in, and in consultation with the chairman and vice chairman of the Tendring Colchester Borders Garden Community Joint Committee, and then we describe the scope of environmental issues. So in the middle of that paragraph, there is a hook to give some extra assurance to members, but I stress, and then I'll stop, this is not unusual. Vast amounts of stuff get done by officers. That's absolutely right and appropriate. The national guidance I've read talks about 95%. I'm not sure I felt good reading that, but if we have the assurance that the things that matter come to joint committee, then I hope that would help. I shall be, to be very clear, in support of this, and I think that's the collective view, but I want to draw out alternative views before we go to the vote, and those who want to speak on this, please show. So, fraction ahead, I think, Councillor Andrea Luxford-Vaughan and then Councillor Summix. Thank you very much.
Okay, first point is a general one, and I might as well just look at you guys over there. The document was unreadable in Acrobat, which meant I had to buy or get a trial on something to convert it into words. Can we, generally, for any document that this council produces or is fed into us, have something that's readable for those of us who need that extra facility. And also it was huge. It was split into lots of different sections, which I downloaded off the website, and then found I couldn't actually email it to other people. So they had to go through the confusion of downloading 10 different documents and finding out what was in it. We've got an agenda today, which is God knows how many pages long, 266, which is longer than the scope was, and it's only 4.8 meg, so I can email it. So just 2 points to make on that. In the report, it suggests that this is too technical a document. I just wanted to point out, one, I didn't feel it was technical. I think in comparison to the evidence base that we were expected, or I hope we were expected to read for the hearing, it was actually quite light reading. I think, if officers believe it's too technical, then we need more support. We need additional training, and that should have been in place in time for this, and certainly should, as a matter of urgency, be in place for when the application comes forward, the full application comes forward. It's also a thing about timescales. I understand this. I'm sure most of us are all experienced in the world of planning. Determinations, that they are a scary thing. To be honest, how we will determine a hybrid application in the timescales that the government sets out just staggers me. I think we'll all be doing speed reading 24 hours a day to do that. But this scope will turn into an environmental statement, which is going to be pretty much of the same scale, size and technicality, and will form one very small element of the evidence that will come along with this planning application. So, if timescales are an issue for this document, then how on earth are we going to approach the application when it comes? I would like some reassurance about how we miraculously change that. And also, we may have an idea of when that application's come in, but we need to book out time in our diaries so that we have time to consider that at that stage. I think it was brought up by my colleague, Wivenhoe colleague, about delegation. Our respective councils have already delegated power to this joint committee. It wasn't something I was particularly in favour of. It seemed to the majority to be the right solution to deal with this, because it's a cross borough project, heavily influenced by Essex. That made sense, but we've already done that delegation. I do not think this committee has the remit. I certainly personally do not think I have the remit of Colchester Borough Council to make a decision on behalf of 51 councillors that I am going to release control that they have already given to me. So in terms of democracy, it stinks as far as I'm concerned. We talked about a call-in procedure. You're right. I mean, we've been looking at whether this is a normal thing to do. It does happen. Environmental scoping documents are sometimes determined. I've been looking at our determination process at Colchester, and one of the things that has highlighted for me is that if an officer is going to determine something that I have particularly strong views on as a ward councillor, then I am allowed to still call it in. No one has explained to me what the call-in procedure would be for me as a councillor of this committee of a delegated power. And without that, I don't think our system is in place to be able to grant delegations, because we don't know what happens. If we don't like that delegation, we have no recourse. And that's probably a question for our monitoring officers. But, presumably, if this gets voted for today, I should still be able to, if I choose, to call it in and force it back to the committee. And I want clarification that that's the case, please. And I'll end on, I must be so dull. I have read the entire document. I'm, if this vote goes the way I don't want it to, then I'm more than happy to spend all of the time you to have to talk through what I think the concerns are in areas that it's lacking or incorrect. But it would be a much easier decision to make if I'd had a report saying we've picked up what Highways England have said. Actually, they have commented. They haven't said very much. We've picked up what Historic England have said. We've picked up what so-and-so said. We are going to make these recommendations to this application. At the moment, I am completely in the dark as to how our officers will react to this. And that is not a position, well, what's the point of the joint committee? If I don't know what I'm delegating decision-wise in terms of what that will manifest itself as, that is not a position I want to be in. And I value, I question the value of this committee in its entirety. So I'm completely against delegating powers.
Thank you, William.
I will support the delegation with just 2 changes, which I'll come to. But as Andrea is, I'm bitterly upset about the way we're manoeuvred into this. And the fact that we haven't seen even a draft of what officers might say about it. And this is the only decision we've been asked to make in a year. And our hand is effectively forced on it. It is technical, but there are some really substantive issues that we need to air. And then to suddenly find this evening that we're going to be timed out on it, and Councillor Scott needing to get away. And I'm just really sorry that I do think these points need raising. Okay, the 2 points on which I think we need to be absolutely clear. The first is that the transport story goes round and round. The link road story goes round and round. We don't know the costs. We've got conflicting views on where it comes. We've got this statement could be this scoping report could require different baselines and all sorts of ways in which we could have very, very important decisions hinging on it. I feel we need an independent transport report from an independent consultant instructed by this committee to get to the bottom of it so we have the full story on the link road. And as I understand it, the ministry, MHCLG or whatever it calls itself now, is saying that this project is stalled. And that is in reality what it is until we've sorted out the link road. So I think as part of this scoping, we should ask for that independent report. The second thing is that there's mention of primary health care in the scoping, but there's no mention of hospitals. And a large settlement on the edge of the town is going to put the hospital facilities in the area under strain. And I think we should have a healthcare impact assessment as well as part of this. And I hope that if we can agree those 2, I would support the delegation, preferably I think it's quite a good idea that Andrea said it should be some type of call-in, if it should be some type of call-in right. But I think it's only practical to delegate such a long document to officers.
Thank you for that. Andy Baker.
Thank you, Chairman. If I can just pick up on a couple of points that have been raised by my colleagues. I'm not against delegated powers. We use it all the time at Tendring because it means that the planning committee deal with those issues that are important. This is very important. However, there's a time scale. I note that the end of time period is now the end of this month. It's laid down by legislation. Thankfully, the applicants have agreed to an extension of time. It is complex. I haven't read the 200+ pages of it, of the environmental impact assessment scoping document that's been submitted. I support the delegation because it takes time, expertise, and that's what our officers have. We're not planners. We can feed into our officers and say, we need to make sure you cover this, 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 and this. Just to pick up on Councillor Sonic's bit, just about the ministry, whatever they're called now. It used to be levelling up, didn't it? But they're called something else. the actual statement released or the press release released last week by the Deputy Prime Minister actually took away and took out the word stalled. I went on radio, I went on pre-recorded TV and said, we are not stalled. We do have a big project, if you like. It is on track, but we are in the hands of the inspector, obviously with the DPD. Let's get that done. Let's get the scoping document, the impact assessment done. If we're not happy with what's said in the environmental statement, then we can debate that at committee. And if we're still not happy after we've debated it, we can refuse the application. So we still have the power. It's only one delegation. We may have a lot longer and a lot bigger conversation and debate when the scheme of delegation is brought forward by officers to this committee to make a decision on. But I fully support it. And Chair, if you're with the amendments, I'm quite happy to move that.
Thank you. I'd like to just round this out. I think that's right. So first of all, Councillor Wake.
Thank you. I can probably be much quicker because I vigorously agree with what Councillor Baker said in this sense. I think there may be an element of attempting to collate, confuse, whatever. What seems to me to be a difference, and the officers will tell me if I have this wrong, between a scoping opinion, an environmental scoping opinion for an environment statement, which, as I understand it, is about what that environmental statement should cover, and an environmental statement. And Andy put it better than I could do after that, because he's quite right. The second thing about this is that I would like to say, Chair, let's get back to basics. And this is part of what I think we should be doing, which is I noted that one of the speakers, and forgive me, I'm not sure what the representative group was, but very articulately said 3 things that she thought ought to be included in that scoping opinion. And I think it would be interesting to hear about that and whether officers have considered those, because that's our job. We should hear if anybody within the general public has any thoughts about that, and that should inform the decision taken by under any delegated scheme. I do not imagine for a moment that our officers, all of whom pretty much in all authorities I've dealt with over a very long period of time have a huge respect for, would do anything other than listen to what's being said, and I'm sure that we can put points to them if we so wish. But it is really important that in looking at what goes into the scoping opinion, it's dealt with the benefit of the planning expertise, and that expertise tells us what those scopes should be. And the reason for that is because if we get that wrong, then that will have legal consequences, including potentially cost consequences. I've had that comment, which I made earlier in another meeting, said as being me saying that it's all too technical and we can't do it. Of course, that's not right. We could do it for the reasons that Councillor Baker says. That isn't a very sensible thing to do. But more importantly, we are looking at the scope. We're looking to make sure that what goes into that scope is what should go into that scope. So thank you, Chair. But I think that is the answer, and I would second any motion to the effect that we should follow that.
Thank you. I want to just make sure that before I go to the officers, I think a couple of points of clarification. I'm sure you're noting them as we go, just so we're clear. I'll keep my view. I'll keep my considered listening to your view to the close. Councillor Luxon-Vaughan, second bite, and then I can go to Councillor Lee Scott.
First of all, I don't know where Councillor Wagner thinks the confusion's coming from. I know the difference between a scope and an environmental statement. One is what it covers, and then one is the report itself. I find it a bit concerning. It was Manda from the community liaison group that we're picking up on something that a member of the public basically has said, and they're correct. That what's missing, but it's a much longer list. And the point is, I'm not getting the opportunity a member of the public has had to say what's missing from the scope, and that's what is a concern. So she would have said, because I looked at her comments: flood risk, drainage, sewage, wastewater, minerals and waste. She's missed off noise, vibration, air quality, and that is just the things I can single down to a one thing that are not covered. There are significant other areas that need our input on. I just find it extraordinary that, I'm on this committee, I bothered to read it, and now I can't actually feed into that process. It seems bizarre. And I ask again, what is the point of the committee?
I'm going to take that as a rhetorical question, if you don't mind. Otherwise, we'll have another round where we'll all agree or disagree. So I'm going to go to Councillor Lee Scott.
Yeah, all I wanted to say was I don't think officers ever meant that we weren't up to looking at the technicalities of it. I don't think that's what was meant in any shape or form. It is practice along with a number of authorities to give delegated power. I don't share some of the concerns, although I do understand where they come from and appreciate that, but I don't necessarily share those concerns and am content to vote for the delegated powers.
Okay, so look, I'm going to ask a couple of questions to my left of our officers. Where I sit is, given the timetable and the pressures of process, I'm minded to support this item, which won't be a surprise. But I do think this committee, Councillor Luxford-Vaughan, does have purpose, curiously, because everything that matters and every decision that matters is going to come here. But I do understand, why wouldn't I, that point about if there are things to be said, why can't they be put into the process? And I'm going to ask a question about that in just a moment. So I think key for me is about the balance we need to strike. And we need to crack on with this. We're under a pressure to do so. The time is limited. It's normal practice to have delegations. And I know the balance of opinion is to accept that. But there is an assurance piece and an involvement piece, which we're all talking to. So let me just ask a couple of questions of officer colleagues. I'm not sure if I personally thought they fitted, but I'd like to ask the questions I was given by, first of all, by Councillor Sunnock. So a couple of requests. His conditions, if you like, for support. Would you like to respond to those, Amy, and a judgment on practicality and how one could address them?
I've been rapidly writing down notes here in response to the points raised, and I'll cover off as many of them as I've managed to note down here, but please do prompt me if there's anything else. So obviously there is the amendment to the recommendation put forward already, Mr. Chairman, about the scope and opinion being prepared in consultation with the Chairman and Vice Chair of the committee. So that has already been discussed there. There was a point raised about hospitals and healthcare. So as part of this consultation, we have consulted with our colleagues at the NHS and various health bodies. They have been in communication with us on this, and they are engaging. They will be feeding back their response on this, and that response will be provided to the applicant as part of the scoping opinion that we will issue. With regards to the health impact assessment, the DPD does require a health impact assessment to be prepared and submitted with the planning application that comes in. It requires it with the first application and all subsequent applications as well. I think on that point, I'd quite like to also say about other statutory bodies. So in the same way, all of the consultation responses that will come in from the health bodies, this is an opportunity for those statutory bodies to be engaged at this early stage and provide feedback that we can consider as part of our scoping opinion, and also pass those on to the applicant for information as well. With regard to a requirement for an independent transport report to be prepared, now the transport elements within the scoping report that has been submitted are being reviewed incredibly robustly and carefully by our transport colleagues at Essex County Council, and also by National Highways, who are a statutory consultee on this. So again, those will feed in to the scoping opinion that will be issued. Their responses will be provided, and that will set the basis for what then needs to come forward within the environmental statement as well.
Can I stop you there for a
Yeah.
second while you gather your thoughts? So from my perspective, the only way this can work is that those who have the statutory responsibility, so for health, so just playing it back to you, for health and transport, nationally and locally, their inputs and their understanding sets the framework for what's going to be required, which will then come back and be considered by this committee. That's what we're saying, aren't we?
Yes,
I can't
that's entirely
see.
correct.
I can't see that that as a outlined scope that we would be or could go anywhere else other than to those with that formal responsibility. The introduction of any alternative would not have the weight that would be required, I think, by the committee and certainly by those we're seeking to serve. They have that responsibility. As long as they're given the opportunity to be explicit about what's required given the DPD, I would hope that would carry weight with colleagues. I'll come to the wider point about the technical point or not about calling an engagement with the scoping, but I hope that's something of an answer to William. William, please. Thanks.
Yes, I think the concern is that there is a health impact assessment, true, but that's around lots of how healthy everyone's going to be because they're going to walk and their cycle and use public transport instead of going by car and all those good things. What we need is very sharply, we need an assessment of the impact of the development on hospital capacity and what the developer will do to mitigate that harm. Okay, that's exactly the sort of thing that this should be about. And if we let it slip now, it'll just slip on and on. We've heard the health services coming along and talking at strategic level, I'm being polite, about what they're going to do. We want to know, where's the extra capacity going to come from? How's it going to happen? So that's the first one. The second one, on the we say that we're going to talk to we're going to have this transport evidence reviewed by 6 highways. Now they have the very biggest incentive to kick this down the road, shall we say. And I don't think the public trust in infrastructure first will come. And I think it's really important for this development and future development that it comes unless we see an independent transport assessment. So I ask again, can we have that? And can we have a focus on hospital capacity in the health assessment?
Okay. All of us have to avoid repeating ourselves, but thank you. I found that clearer. I think as this is scoping from which ultimately evidence and application comes, when you have that, I actually personally try not to jump ahead of events, and one would actually want to be testing that, the quality of it, and that's where an independent view would come. I personally, I can't see how it would fit at this stage. You have to ask those with the responsibility, but the clarity, the way in which you expressed it, I expect the same. I expect that the committee will want to see evidence of calculation of impact on the facilities that we have, hospital and other primary care, and the prospects of that being met either locally or let's be frank, by managing the pressures that would add to the existing facilities. I think that's entirely reasonable, and I would have thought that would be acceptable. Amy, do you agree?
Yes, I agree. That would be covered within the environmental impact assessment, the environmental statement and the health impact assessment that would accompany the application.
Thank you. I hope that helps a little bit. The point I'd just like to walk through is this point about contribution to the scoping, the draft scoping opinion. I hope the language is right. So I was comfortable in principle because the content is going to come to us. But as this conversation has shown, we can have a debate about exactly what it is we should be asking for, even though it's built upon voluminous framework of the DPD and all the things that we've gone through. I absolutely understand where some members might be saying, can I contribute? So I think my sort of open question would be, alive to the fact you have a timetable. We need to remind ourselves, members, that's why we're doing this. It's a practical thing to get ourselves up and running in the time frame that we've got, is what we can do to engage members ahead of. We got my hook, which says, that we'll come back in effect to the committee in the fastest way we can, which is through the chair and or vice chair. But I'm absolutely sympathetic to the fact that if there's a scoping opinion and a framework, that extra contributions from members to you could be helpful to you and avoid us coming back around it later.
Indeed, there is nothing to stop members of this planning committee or all other ward members, ward councillors, submitting a representation on the scoping opinion and the consultation that we have undertaken. So as part of that consultation, we did consult with all the parish and town councils and all ward members within Tendring and Colchester. And all representations that have been received or may be received within the timeframe that we have available to us will form part of that scoping opinion, which goes forward and will be provided to the applicant. So there is nothing to stop any individual member submitting a representation on that consultation with regard to this application.
Thank you. I hear the clock ticking. So could you just remind us of the timetable? Because I think we should, assuming my colleagues are content, why wouldn't we want to remind ourselves of that opportunity to add to the sum of the representations, which I know will be well received when they come through as part of the obligation to respond. Thank you.
The formal consultation period has passed. The statutory timeframe for the determination of these applications is 5 weeks, and we have carried out already the requirement for the 28-day statutory consultation that was required. We have agreed an extension of time with the applicants to the 30th of September in the first instance at the moment. We have also agreed with some statutory bodies a slight extension to the timeframe of the consultation period as well, to allow them to submit their comments. There is no reason why we cannot agree another short extension of time to the period in which people can submit comments to this application. If you go onto the council's web page and make your comments, it is still open for people to make comments, and we can agree with members a timeframe in which they can do that.
Thank you. I hope that gets us to to some reasonable middle ground of an engagement and insight. And sorry, to my left.
What I was going to suggest, Chairman and members of the committee, that here in the debate, you may wish to consider adding an additional recommendation, which is to allow members of the committee to be able to submit comments into the process, to request that officers do seek that additional extension to allow that process to happen. It's quite clear through the debate and listening to Amy as well, that some of those concerns that have already been addressed will be picked up in other ways. However, the views of the committees that they would like to feed in as well. So I was just going to suggest that as an additional recommendation if you wanted to include that.
Can I just get a sense of colleagues, are you in favour of that additional amendment? Still keeps the principal delegation. It means we do not lose more than a margin on the timeline. It's my only way of trying to find some mid ground here, or if not, we'll revert to where we were.
Sorry, Chairman, we had that facility anyway, didn't we?
Oh, well, look, and then, okay. Well, I'm talking to everybody here, so let's make it collective, not singular, but thank you. I hear you. That's interesting. Right, Leslie.
Yeah, but I think you've heard from all of us, haven't you? Possibly not Councillor Cousins. But I think, it isn't necessarily true that the views expressed by two of the councillors are those that are held by the remainder of us. I appreciate you're still reaching your view. My concern is to be sure that we get this scoping opinion under a delegated scheme under which officers make the decision. I have no problem with what goes into that in terms, so long as it's consistent with what we're entitled to take into account legally. But I think from my point of view, the important thing is that what we ask of the developers to be included in the scoping opinion is the right and proper thing to do, assessed, but with qualified planning expertise, and that decision is delegated so that not only do we have that expertise and can show that's what defined the decision making, but also that we have that expertise in such a way that we can deal with the matter as quickly as possible. I don't think we can micromanage the scoping agreement as a committee. I think we definitely have to spend more time on the environment statement itself, and I would really like to spend what time we've got much more closely focused on that. So for me, the delegation is significant, important, entirely consistent with what would normally happen. And as we've heard, there are numerous ways in which people can continue, as indeed the member of the public did, to suggest things that should or should not be within the scoping agreement, which can then be properly assessed by the officers. Thank you.
Thank you. Final remarks.
Well, I'm still waiting for clarification on what the calling procedure would be for delegated powers. Will it follow the same system as Colchester does?
Andrew.
Chairman, thank you. There will be no scope for a call-in procedure with this delegated decision.
Thank you. That's clarification. William.
Yes, I'm just wanting to make clear, I think the two suggestions I've made are within the legal scope. If they're not, I'd like to understand why. And the second is, I still haven't got an answer. Will we have an independent transport, or will we require the developer to get an independent transport assessment? I'm not happy with these ambitious modal shift assumptions, these very high baseline assumptions and so on. And I really feel we do need an outside look, and I think members of the public are feeling that way as well, judging by the comments we've heard this evening.
Chair, the assessments are being made by the Highway Authority. That is Essex County Council's responsibility. They will, where appropriate, get independent assessments of different elements because that's what they would do, and we will have the opportunity to consider what they have said. I personally have seen no evidence whatsoever to support a suggestion that Essex would put inflated or otherwise inappropriate statements into documents. And we're all here to make sure in any event that anything that we pick up, we would make available and ask of them. But there is no warrant for revisiting that with a separate independent assessment unless any of those involved wish to do that in their own right. So it might well be that members of the public might wish to have their own independent consultants. We've seen that in a number of different projects. The individual councils might wish to do that if they felt so inclined, but that is not the function of the Highway Authority, and the Highway Authority has to do the very best it can in the interests of the general public and the two areas that are concerned. It would be completely inappropriate in my view, and I'm sure that the officers to this committee will tell me if I have that wrong.
Thank you. That reinforces my understanding of how the process will work. I say the same thing again. I think I suspect we'll do it again. When the responses come back to us, I'm getting advice to my left. I think we've got a couple of things still hanging. I know that we're content to go to the vote, and I'm prepared to do that. I'd want to go back to where I was before. It adds a value, which was reinforcing that right of members to contribute, and Councillor Luxon-Vaughan is making plain that she knows she has that right already. But I want to include the joint committee members in that sense of that opportunity, and indeed being reminded of it. There was a suggestion of a change to language. Do we have a couple of lines on that? I think it can be very short.
Try and remember what I said now.
To talk about the invitation to members to contribute.
Yes, I was remembering. Councillor Baker, as you've moved the recommendation with the amendment already proposed, what I was suggesting, and obviously it'd be at the moment with you to decide whether you want to include it or not, is whether to enable joint committee members to be able to provide their individual opinions to the officers prior to making the decision, whether officers should seek an extension of time. I only suggested that because of what was coming through. So it's obviously with regards to you, whether you feel it's necessary or not.
Chairman, if I may, obviously officers already got an extension. We have representatives from the developer here who's listened and probably made copious notes about what's been discussed. I would hope that if members of this committee want to make representations, comments, or whatever it might be, that they still can, albeit that we've been told the consultation period is over. The way I understand it, and I appreciate this is not a planning application, but comments can be made right up to the time of determination. So I think officers will take what's been said and hopefully take that forward. I don't think we need to add another part of the recommendation personally, but I'll bow to advice on that.
No, look, we have to draw it to a close. I mean, points been made, and I understand it. So back to your move that we go to the vote as amended, on the understanding, not needing to be captured here, that we have that right and we're encouraged to exercise it.
Yes, Chair.
Can I ask for a seconder?
Can I just say, and that's without.
Understood. It's as proposed to, as written, as proposed. What we've had is an exploration of alternatives. That's the nature of the conversation we have here.
No, thank you, Chair.
That's not. Can I ask that for a vote in favour of, as amended, the proposition to delegate? I can ask for abstentions first. Those opposed? Carried 5-2, I think it is. Look, thank you. That's been a very vigorous conversation. I hope the public managed to follow some of it and that those here understood the sentiments behind it. Could we just stand still for a second? That's the end of our conversation today as the Joint Committee. We will be publishing our future meetings schedule. We will be continuing to make sure that our materials and our progress are publicly shared and continue to invite public engagement at every stage. On that basis, I thank everybody for coming, public and members here and visiting. Thank you very much. Meeting closed.